The girl made a secret signal to the police dog, and he discovered it was a kidnapping. And what he did next. Saturday morning arrived with that characteristic sticky heat of Ironville, where even the wind seemed too lazy to blow between the iron hills. Anthony Farris adjusted his white linen shirt as he walked through the Central Market, feeling the sweat trickle down his neck. Around him, vendors shouted offers, customers haggled prices, and the smell of ripe fruit mingled with the aroma of fried pastries and freshly brewed coffee. It was a world away from the air-conditioned office where he spent most of his days, managing one of the region's largest construction companies. He wasn't even sure why he had started frequenting the place. Perhaps it was an attempt to escape the heavy silence that had dominated his mansion in recent months. Patricia, his wife, had turned their home into a museum of appearances, where everything shone but nothing warmed. Their conversations had become cold transactions, negotiations about social engagements and public appearances. Love, if it had ever truly existed, had evaporated like water spilled on hot asphalt. Anthony bought a cup of sugarcane juice and looked for a place to sit. He found a worn wooden bench under the generous shade of an old mango tree, whose branches stretched over part of the square. He observed the movement around him, appreciating that raw, true humanity that contrasted so sharply with the rehearsed smiles of corporate events. That's when he felt the gaze, intense, persistent. He turned his head and met the darkest eyes he had ever seen. They belonged to a frail girl, no more than 8 years old, with tangled hair tied back with a faded pink elastic band. She wore an oversized t-shirt with a princess print almost erased by countless washes. She stood a few feet away, motionless as a statue, but her eyes didn't blink, didn't waver. There was something in that gaze that deeply disturbed him, unsettling familiarity he couldn't name. Anthony was used to averting his gaze from children begging for alms, not out of cruelty, but out of emotional self-preservation. He knew that a longer look could crack the armor he had built over the years, but with that girl, it was different. He couldn't look away. It was as if she saw through him, as if she knew secrets he himself had buried deep in his consciousness. The girl took a step forward, then another. Her bare feet raised, small clouds of red dust. Anthony noticed that she wasn't looking at his face, but at the necklace he wore around his neck. It was a simple piece, a golden horseshoe hanging from a thin chain, a gift from his grandfather when he turned 15. He wore it every day as a talisman, a piece of identity he carried with him. When the girl finally stopped in front of him, so close that Anthony could see the freckles on her nose, she opened her mouth and said something that made the world around him disappear for an instant. Her voice was thin, almost a whisper, but the words cut through his chest like sharp blades. My daddy had a necklace like that. Anthony felt the air leave his lungs. The cup of sugarcane juice slipped from his hand and shattered on the ground, spilling green liquid and sugarcane pulp. He didn't hear the noise. He didn't feel the splashes wetting his Italian shoe. He could only stare at that child and process what he had just heard. The words were simple, childish, but they carried a weight he was unprepared to bear. Your father, he managed to say, his voice hoarse. Who is your father? The girl tilted her head to the side as if the question was strange. My daddy's name was John Thaddeus, but he went away a long time ago. Grandma said he had to travel. Anthony felt his legs weaken. John Thaddeus. Thaddeus, his younger brother, the same one with whom he had broken off relations 5 years ago after a violent argument that involved accusations of theft, betrayal, and irresponsibility. The last time they spoke, cruel words were exchanged, accusations were hurled, and a door was slammed shut with such force that the echoes still resonated in Anthony's memory. He tried to compose himself, but his voice came out trembling. Thaddeus is your father. The girl nodded affirmatively, with that childish naturalness of someone who doesn't understand the complexity of what she is revealing. He lives with you, Uncle? Uncle. The word was like a punch to the stomach. Anthony opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. How did that child know who he was? Why was she calling him Uncle? And more importantly, where was Thaddeus now? I don't know where your father is, he finally managed to say. Each word weighing tons. "We haven't spoken in a very long time." The disappointment on the girl's face was instant and heartbreaking. Her big eyes filled with tears, but she held them back with a strength that shouldn't belong to someone so young. "You're his brother. You have to know. He said you always knew everything." Anthony felt a sharp pain in his chest. How many times must Thaddeus have talked about him to that child? How many stories must he have told about his older brother, probably painting a very different picture from the current reality? Guilt began to seep into his veins like poison. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to buy time to process it all. "Luna." The name was soft, delicate, completely out of place in that chaotic situation. "Luna," Anthony repeated mentally, feeling the weight of each letter. "Where do you live, Luna?" The girl pointed vaguely in the direction of Mine Hill, the disadvantaged community that sprawled across the city's slopes. "With Grandma Sebastian. But she's sick, very sick." Something inside Anthony broke at that moment. It wasn't a rational decision, it wasn't a calculation of risks and benefits. It was a visceral impulse, an urgent need to understand what was happening, to connect the dots between that child, his missing brother, and the guilt that was beginning to corrode his conscience. "Can you take me to your house?" he asked. Luna studied him for a long moment, as if measuring his character, evaluating whether she could trust this man in expensive clothes and soft hands that had never known manual labor. Finally, she nodded and started walking. Anthony followed her through the busy market streets, then through the narrow alleys that snaked up the hill. The asphalt gave way to dirt roads, the shops gave way to wooden shacks and improvised brickwork. With each step, he felt further from his world of comfort and closer to a reality he had always pretended didn't exist. Children played barefoot among accumulated trash. Women washed clothes in aluminum basins. Men chatted on street corners under the sparse shade of sickly trees. Luna walked with the naturalness of someone who knew every stone, every pothole, every stray dog sleeping in the sun. She greeted neighbors by name, avoided puddles of dirty water with the grace of a ballerina. Anthony, in turn, stumbled over uneven terrain, felt sweat soaking his back, and breathed with difficulty the thin air of the ascent. When they finally stopped in front of a two-room house, with peeling walls and a patched roof of different-colored tiles, Anthony had to lean against the wall to catch his breath. Luna pushed the wooden door which creaked on its rusty hinges, and entered. "Grandma, I brought a visitor," she announced with forced cheerfulness. Anthony entered behind her, and needed a few seconds for his eyes to adjust to the dimness inside. The smell of medicine mixed with weak coffee invaded his nostrils. In the tiny living room, which also served as a bedroom, a single bed occupied almost all the space. On it, an old woman with white hair and a face marked by time lay, covered up to her neck with a patchwork quilt. Mrs. Sebastian opened her eyes with effort and looked at the visitor. Her thin face contracted into an expression that mingled surprise and something Anthony couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps distrust, perhaps recognition, perhaps just weariness. The old woman took a moment to speak. Her eyes, even tired from illness, maintained a firmness that surprised Anthony. She observed him as if reading the pages of a familiar book, deciphering every line of expression on his face, every hesitation in his movements. Finally, with a weak but clear voice, she asked who he was. "My name is Anthony Farris," he replied, removing a hat he wasn't wearing, an automatic gesture of respect he had learned from his father. "I am John Thaddeus's brother." The name provoked an immediate reaction. Mrs. Sebastian closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them again, Anthony could see tears accumulated in the corners. She didn't cry, but the emotion was there, pulsing beneath the fragile surface of her composure. "So you finally showed up," she said, and there was a barely disguised tone of accusation in her words. 5 years waiting. 5 years this girl asking about her father. 5 years I've been enduring alone because he said you would come when needed. The words struck Anthony like stones. He didn't know what to answer. How could he explain that he knew nothing of this, that he had cut ties with his brother so completely that he had no idea where he was, what he was doing, whether he was alive or not, that he had built a wall so high around his life that no one from his past could reach him anymore. "I didn't know," he murmured, and the phrase sounded pathetic even to his own ears. "I didn't know he had a daughter. I didn't know you existed. I didn't know anything." Mrs. Sebastian let out a long, tired sigh. "Luna, go get some water for the visitor, and bring the box from under my bed." The girl obeyed immediately, her bare feet making small noises on the cold cement floor. While she was out, the old woman fixed her eyes on Anthony with disturbing intensity. "John Thaddeus talked a lot about you, Mr. Anthony," she said. "He told stories from when you were children, how you always looked after him, always protected him from the bigger boys at school. He said he was very proud of his older brother, who had built a successful life. But he also said you had changed. That money had hardened your heart." Anthony felt his cheeks burn. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't quite like that there were reasons for the breakup, that Thaddeus had done unforgivable things. But the words died in his throat, because deep down he knew there was truth in those accusations. He knew he had become a different person over the years, colder, more calculating, more concerned with appearances and profits than with people and feelings. Luna returned, carrying a glass of water in one hand and a crumpled cardboard box in the other. Anthony drank the water gratefully, feeling the liquid cool his dry throat. The girl placed the box at the foot of the bed and looked at her grandmother with expectation. "You can show him, Luna, he needs to see." The child opened the box with an almost religious reverence, as if opening a treasure chest. And perhaps for her it truly was. Inside was a collection of objects that seemed to have no immediate connection to each other. Old photographs, some yellowed by time, a faded teddy bear, a child's football jersey, a crumpled school notebook, and at the bottom, carefully wrapped in a checkered cloth, a necklace identical to the one Anthony wore around his neck. He picked up the necklace with trembling hands. It was exactly like his, even in the smallest details. The golden horseshoe with the same proportions, the chain with the same link pattern. His grandfather had commissioned 2 identical necklaces, one for each grandson, at a time when the family was still united, when love and loyalty were values that were practiced, not just preached. "This was my daddy's," Luna explained, her voice filled with pride and longing. "He left it for me before he left. He said that one day I would understand what it means." Anthony couldn't take his eyes off the necklace. How many times had he and Thaddeus sworn never to take off those necklaces, never to separate, always to look after each other? How many childhood promises had been broken by time and life? He put the necklace back in the box and realized there was more there. Luna pulled out a yellowed envelope and handed it to him. "Grandma said this is for you." Anthony opened the envelope carefully, fearing the fragile paper would crumble in his fingers. Inside was a handwritten letter, with handwriting he recognized immediately. It was from Thaddeus, dated 4 years ago. His hands trembled as he unfolded the pages. "Brother," the letter began, and that word alone was enough to make Anthony's eyes sting. No one had called him that since Thaddeus disappeared. "If you're reading this, it means Luna managed to find you, or that I didn't come back when I promised. Either way, I need you to know some things. Things I tried to tell you many times, but you never wanted to listen." Anthony continued reading, and each word was like a dagger to his chest. Thaddeus explained that the accusations of theft Anthony had made were false, that he had never stolen anything from the company, that he was trying to protect his brother from something much worse, but that Patricia always blocked his attempts to make contact, always convinced Anthony that he was a bad influence, a failure trying to take advantage of the family's success. The letter revealed that Thaddeus had discovered a scheme of money diversion within the construction company, run by someone very close to Anthony, someone he trusted blindly. But before he could present the evidence, he was accused of being the thief himself, and when he tried to defend himself, he found only closed doors and looks of contempt. "I could have insisted more," the letter continued. "I could have shouted, caused a scandal, forced you to listen to me. But I saw the way you looked at me, brother, as if I were trash, as if everything we had lived together meant nothing, and that broke me in a way no accusation could. So I decided to leave, to rebuild my life far from everything. But before disappearing completely, I found Luna. She was alone in the church square, abandoned, hungry and cold. I couldn't leave her there. I know what it's like to feel abandoned, you know. Anthony had to stop reading for a moment. Tears blurred his vision, and he didn't want Luna or Mrs. Sebastian to see him in that state. He quickly wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and continued. Luna is not my blood daughter, but she is my heart's daughter. I raised her as best I could, with the help of Mrs. Sebastian, who is an angel on this earth. But things got difficult. I started receiving threats. People connected to that scheme I discovered. They said that if I opened my mouth, they would make me disappear for good. And I was afraid, not for myself, but for Luna. That's why I kept her here, in this safe place, and disappeared. Because if they couldn't find me, they would have no reason to hurt her. Anthony's hands trembled so much that he almost dropped the letter. The pieces began to fit together, forming a very different picture from the one he had painted in his mind all those years. Thaddeus was not the villain. Thaddeus was the victim, and he, Anthony, had been the unconscious executioner. The letter ended with a plea. Brother, if you're reading this, take care of Luna for me. She is innocent in all of this. Don't let the world soil her heart as it soiled ours. And if one day you want to forgive me, I'll be waiting, because a brother is a brother no matter how much we hurt each other. Your brother who still loves you, John Thaddeus. Anthony folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. His eyes were red, his breathing irregular. Luna watched him with those big, dark eyes, waiting for some kind of reaction that would make sense in her childish world. Mrs. Sebastian broke the silence. He loved you very much, Mr. Anthony. Even after everything, even when I told him to forget, to move on. He always said that one day you would discover the truth, that one day you would come for Luna. It seems he was right. Anthony finally found his voice, although it came out hoarse and broken. Who was diverting the money? Thaddeus wrote the name. Mrs. Sebastian shook her head negatively. He never told me. He said it was dangerous for me to know. But he mentioned they were important people, people who could destroy everything if they knew he knew. Anthony spent the following days in a state of constant restlessness. He returned home that afternoon with his mind buzzing with unanswered questions, with guilt weighing on his shoulders like a sack of cement. Patricia barely looked up from her decorating magazine when he entered, only commenting that he smelled of dust and sweat, that he should take a shower before sitting anywhere. He went up to the bedroom without answering, leaving his expensive clothes thrown on the bathroom floor as the hot shower water ran over his body. But not all the water in the world could wash away the dirt he felt inside. He stood there, his forehead resting against the cold tiles, trying to process everything he had discovered. That night, during the silent dinner they shared at the 12-seat table where only the two of them sat, Anthony tried to start a conversation. "Do you remember my brother Thaddeus?" he asked casually, cutting the medallion in mushroom sauce that the maid had prepared. Patricia looked up with an expression of annoyance. "That irresponsible man who tried to take advantage of you, of course I remember. Why are you bringing this up now?" Anthony observed his wife carefully, looking for signs of something he hadn't noticed before. "He tried to talk to me a few times after the fight, didn't he?" "He tried," she confirmed, returning her attention to her plate. "And I always sent him away, as we agreed. I wasn't going to let that loser drag you down with him." "Don't you think I should have talked to him, heard his side of the story?" Patricia let out a humorless laugh. "What for, Anthony? To hear more lies? More excuses? Leonard showed you all the evidence of what he was doing, the equipment he stole, the tools he sold on the side. It was a police matter. Leonard. The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Leonard Baxter, his trusted accountant for over 10 years, the man who managed every penny of the company, who had access to all accounts, all contracts, all financial secrets, the same man who had presented the accusations against Thaddeus. Anthony felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Where is that evidence now?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "What do you mean, where? It must be in the office files. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," he lied, returning to cut his meat although he no longer had any appetite. That night Anthony barely slept. He lay next to Patricia, listening to her regular breathing as he planned his next steps. In the morning, as soon as she left for her weekly spa appointment, he called the office and asked them to retrieve all files related to the case from 5 years ago. He spent Monday locked in his office, sifting through documents, comparing numbers, following paper trails he should have followed long ago. And the more he looked, the more irregularities he found. Duplicate invoices, receipts for equipment that never arrived at the construction sites, transfers to accounts that no longer existed. Leonard had been meticulous but not perfect. Small inconsistencies began to appear, like cracks in a seemingly solid wall. Anthony picked up the phone and called a private investigator he had used before in some labor disputes. "I need a discreet investigation," he said, and began to pass on the details. Meanwhile, he returned to Mine Hill whenever he could. Luna greeted him with growing joy with each visit, and Mrs. Sebastian, although still somewhat reserved, began to relax her distrust. Anthony brought food, medicine for the old woman, toys for the girl, small gestures. That didn't erase his mistakes, but perhaps they were a start. On one of these visits, while Luna played in the narrow yard with a doll he had bought, Mrs. Sebastian called Anthony close to the bed. He knelt beside her, and the old woman held his hand with surprising strength for someone so fragile. "There's one more thing you need to know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "John Thaddeus left something buried in the yard, under the guava tree. He said it was for Luna, but that it should only be unearthed if you showed up or if he didn't return by the time she turned 10. Anthony felt his heart race. "How? What is it?" "I don't know. He didn't tell me. But he said it was important, that it could change everything." They waited until Luna got tired of playing and came inside for water. Then, with an old shovel Anthony found leaning against the wall, he began to dig under the small guava tree that grew crookedly in the corner of the yard. The earth was hard, compacted by years without adequate rain, and he had to use all his strength to penetrate the dry layers. After almost half an hour of digging, the shovel hit something metallic. Anthony knelt and began to remove the dirt with his hands, not caring about the grime that accumulated under his previously clean nails. Slowly, he revealed a large biscuit tin, one of those old ones grandmothers used to store threads and buttons. He carefully pulled out the tin and took it inside. Mrs. Sebastian was sitting on the bed, propped up by pillows, her eyes fixed on the dirt-covered object. Luna appeared at the door, curious about the commotion. Anthony wiped the lid with a cloth and, with trembling hands, opened the tin. Inside were stacks of money, carefully organized and protected by plastic bags. But that wasn't what caught Anthony's attention. On top of the money, there was a thick envelope and a small digital voice recorder, one of those old ones that used batteries. He picked up the envelope first, another letter from Thaddeus. But this one was different, longer, more detailed, more desperate. "Brother, if you found this, it means Luna led you here. It means you finally know the truth, or at least part of it. The money is from the sale of my share of the farm. Remember Grandpa's farm? You always thought it was only yours, but I had half. I sold my part and saved everything for Luna, to ensure she has a future, no matter what happens to me." Anthony didn't even know Thaddeus still owned half the farm. After the fight, he had simply taken control of everything, convinced that his brother deserved nothing. Another layer of guilt settled over the previous ones. The letter continued. "But the money isn't the most important thing. The recorder has conversations I secretly recorded. Conversations between Leonard and other guys. They talk about the whole scheme, about how they've been diverting money for years, about how they'll blame you if someone finds out. I tried to show you this, brother. I tried so many times, but you never received me. And when Patricia found out I had these recordings, the threats started. They said if I opened my mouth they would finish me, and I believed them because I saw what these people are capable of." Anthony's hands trembled so much that he almost dropped the letter. He picked up the recorder, put in new batteries he had in his backpack, and pressed play. Leonard's voice filled the stuffy room, clear and unmistakable. He was talking to two other voices that Anthony recognized as suppliers who always got the best contracts. They discussed values, percentages, ways to hide transactions. At one point, one of the voices asked about the boss's brother. Leonard laughed. Thaddeus, he's easy to deal with. I've already planted enough evidence to sink him, and Anthony is already somewhat suspicious of his brother anyway. Just a final push and he'll cut ties. After that, we'll be calm. Anthony paused the recording and had to take several deep breaths to keep from vomiting. Mrs. Sebastian watched him in silence, her eyes full of a compassion he didn't deserve. Luna, not understanding what was happening, had gone back to the yard. The week that followed was the most difficult of Anthony's life. He needed to act cautiously, without raising suspicions, while his world crumbled around him like a building with rotten foundations. He continued going to the office normally, greeting Leonard with the same firm handshake as always, discussing spreadsheets and contracts as if nothing had changed. But inside, a devastating storm swept away any remnant of peace that might still exist. The private investigator worked quickly. In a few days, he brought detailed reports that confirmed everything Thaddeus's recordings revealed. Leonard had created a complex network of diversions that had extended for years, involving not only suppliers but also some engineers from the company itself. They overbilled projects, bought materials that were never delivered, created phantom employees whose salaries went directly to offshore accounts. The amount diverted was staggering. Millions of pounds that explained why, despite increasingly larger contracts, the company was not growing at the expected rate. Anthony had always attributed this to economic crises, fierce competition, operational costs. He never imagined he was being robbed from within by someone in whom he placed blind trust. But the most painful discovery came when the investigator delivered the last report. Patricia knew. Not all the details, perhaps, but she knew enough. There were records of phone conversations, encrypted emails, bank transfers to an account in her name. Leonard paid her to keep Thaddeus away, to ensure the troublesome brother had no access to Anthony. When he confronted his wife on a rainy Tuesday night, Anthony discovered he was capable of a coldness he didn't know he possessed. Patricia was in the living room, flipping through imported furniture catalogues, when he threw the envelope with the evidence onto her lap. She opened it, read it quickly, and, to his surprise, denied nothing. She simply shrugged, as if it were a minor issue, a business misunderstanding that could be resolved with a good conversation. "You knew my brother was innocent," Anthony said, and his voice came out so cold that even he himself was startled. "You knew, and yet you encouraged me to cut ties with him. For money." "It wasn't just for money," she replied, putting the envelope away as if it were just bills to pay. "It was for us, for this life we built. Your brother was always a burden, Anthony, always asking for help, always having problems. I just helped cut off a gangrenous limb before it infected the rest of the body." "He wasn't gangrenous, he was my brother." "He was your brother," she corrected, standing up and smoothing her impeccable skirt. "Now he's just an inconvenient memory. And you should thank me for having the courage to do what needed to be done. Because you never would have. You're too weak for that," Anthony felt. Something irrevocably break inside him. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred. It was a crystalline clarity, painful in its precision. He had married a woman who saw people as chess pieces, who calculated affections in cost-benefit spreadsheets, and worst of all, he had allowed her to turn him into someone similar. "I want a divorce," he said simply. Patricia laughed, a dry, calculated sound. "Great, my lawyers will love that news. You know I'll get half of everything, don't you? And considering you're about to sink into scandal when you report Leonard, half of little is still better than nothing." She was right, of course. Patricia was always right when it came to numbers and strategies, but for the first time in years, Anthony didn't care. Some prices were worth paying. Reporting Leonard was like detonating a bomb in the center of his own life. The police were called. Investigations were opened. The local media devoured the story eagerly. Respected businessman uncovers corruption scheme in his own company. The headlines ranged from sensationalist to moralistic, but all agreed on one point. Anthony Farris's empire was crumbling. Clients cancelled contracts. Banks suspended credit. Employees began looking for new jobs. Within weeks, the construction company that had taken 15 years to build was on the verge of bankruptcy. Leonard was arrested, as were his accomplices, but the damage was done. Patricia moved fast, as always. Her lawyers managed to freeze assets, securing her share before everything was consumed by lawsuits. She left the mansion taking half the furniture, half the bank accounts, half of a life that Anthony now realized had never truly been his. He found himself alone in a house too large, surrounded by empty spaces that echoed his footsteps. The maid resigned, unsure if she would still receive a salary. The gardener stopped showing up. Even the neighbor's dog, which always barked at him in the morning, seemed to have lost interest. It was in this absolute void that Anthony made a decision. He sold the mansion, sold the imported car, sold everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. With the little money he managed to save, he rented a simple house in a working-class neighborhood with 3 bedrooms and a small but sunny backyard. And then he went to get Luna. Mrs. Sebastian had worsened. The doctor Anthony paid to examine her was direct. It was a matter of weeks, perhaps days. The old woman needed care he couldn't offer there, but she refused to go to the hospital. She wanted to stay home, she said, in the place she knew, surrounded by the things she loved. Anthony hired a nurse to care for her during the day, and he himself spent the nights there, sleeping in a chair beside the bed. Luna stayed between the two of them, sometimes playing in the yard, sometimes sitting at the foot of the bed, telling stories she invented about princesses and kind dragons. On one of those nights when Luna was already asleep wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, Mrs. Sebastian called Anthony closer. Her voice was even weaker, each word a visible effort. "You've become a good man again," she said, her eyes blurred by illness, but still carrying that characteristic firmness. John Thaddeus would be proud. Anthony held her hand as light and fragile as an injured bird. "I should have believed him. I should have listened. The past doesn't come back, young man, but the future can still be different. Luna needs you now. She needs a real father." "I'm not her father. I barely know this girl." Mrs. Sebastian squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Being a father isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about being present. John Thaddeus chose to be her father when he found her alone in that square. Now you need to make the same choice." Silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of the rain beginning to fall outside. Finally, Anthony asked what had tormented him since he read the letters. "Where do you think he is? Why hasn't he returned?" The old woman closed her eyes. "I don't know, my son. But I know he's alive. I know, because every now and then money arrives by mail without a sender. Always on important dates, Luna's birthday, Christmas. It's not much, but it's from him. I'm sure." Anthony felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. If Thaddeus was alive, if he was somewhere thinking of them, maybe there was still a chance to fix everything, to ask for forgiveness, to rebuild what he had destroyed. Mrs. Sebastian passed away 3 days later on a quiet Sunday morning. It was peaceful, without pain, surrounded by people who loved her. Luna cried a lot, clinging to Anthony as if he were the only solid thing in a world that kept crumbling, and he held her, silently promising that he wouldn't abandon her, that he would be the father she deserved, even without knowing quite how to do it. The first few months with Luna were a chaotic mix of clumsy attempts and unexpected small victories. Anthony, who had never cared for a child, found himself incapable of the most basic tasks. He burned the rice, shrunk clothes in the dryer, forgot to pick Luna up from school twice in the first week. But the girl had infinite patience with him, teaching him with the practical wisdom of someone who had always had to take care of herself. She showed him how to make pasta the way she liked it, with simple tomato sauce and grated cheese on top. She taught him that white clothes couldn't be washed with colored ones. She reminded him of school times, gym days when she needed to bring sneakers, the dates of parent-teacher meetings he had never imagined attending. Anthony enrolled Luna in a small private school, using part of the money he had managed to save. He bought uniforms, school supplies, a new backpack with a star print that she chose with shining eyes. He learned to make her packed lunch, cheese and ham sandwiches, juice boxes, chocolate biscuits, simple things that gained monumental importance when made with love. The house they rented was in a working-class neighborhood 20 minutes from the center of Ironville. It had walls with peeling paint, windows that creaked when opened, a shower that failed on cold days. But it had light coming in the morning. It had a backyard where Luna could play. It had voices of neighbors greeting over the fence. It was a real home, something Anthony had never had even when living in mansions. Without the company, without social commitments, without the life he had built on false foundations, Anthony had to start from scratch. He began doing small repair jobs for neighbors. He fixed a roof here, painted a wall there, installed a sink elsewhere. He discovered he liked working with his hands, seeing concrete results at the end of the day, receiving honest payments for honest work. Some former employees, those who knew his character before the scandal, began to seek him out. They formed a kind of informal cooperative, taking on small jobs that large construction companies didn't want. Residential renovations, extensions, small constructions. The money was little, but it was clean, and that made all the difference. Luna flourished in that environment. At school, she quickly made friends, always surrounded by other children during recess. Teachers praised her intelligence and curiosity. At home, she filled the empty spaces with colorful drawings stuck on the fridge, dolls scattered around the living room, children's songs she sang off-key in the shower. Anthony discovered that those sounds, which would have deeply irritated him before, were now the most beautiful soundtrack he had ever heard. But there was a shadow hanging over everything. Luna often asked about her father, especially at night, when the lights went out and childish fears took shape. "Will he come back, Uncle Anthony?" she asked, her little voice full of hope and fear. "Will my daddy come get me?" Anthony didn't know what to answer. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want to destroy the hope that kept that child going. So he said vague things, that her father loved her very much, that he would certainly return when he could, and that meanwhile, he would take care of her as if she were his own daughter. He began to investigate on his own, using contacts he still maintained in various sectors. But Thaddeus seemed to have disappeared completely. No records of formal work, no movement in old bank accounts, no digital traces. As if he had become a shadow, present only in memories, and in the letters he had left behind. The only clues were the envelopes that occasionally arrived by mail, as Mrs. Sebastian had mentioned. Always without a sender, always with enough money to cover some specific need of Luna's. Once, an envelope arrived with the exact amount for a dental treatment she needed. Another time, the money covered new uniforms when she grew, as if someone was watching from afar, caring even without being present. Anthony carefully kept these envelopes, looking for clues in the postmarks, in the handwriting of the addresses, in the type of paper used. But he found nothing concrete. Thaddeus was too careful, or too desperate, to leave traces that could be followed. Life took its course with a comforting routine, waking up early, making coffee, getting Luna ready for school, working during the day, picking. The girl up in the afternoon, helping with homework, dining together, stories before bed. Simple rhythms that Anthony had never valued before, but which he now recognized as the true treasures of existence. On a Saturday afternoon, almost a year after everything had begun, Anthony was in the backyard fixing a used bicycle he had bought for Luna when his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, with an area code from a city he didn't immediately recognize. "Hello?" he answered, holding the phone between his shoulder and ear while tightening a screw. The voice on the other end was male, somewhat breathless, filled with pain. "Mr. Anthony Farris?" "Yes, that's me. Who is this?" There was a pause, filled with background noises that seemed to come from a busy environment. "My name is Robert. I'm a truck driver. I'm calling from a service station on the M1 motorway. There's a guy here who had an accident. He's a bit hurt. He asked me to call this number." Anthony felt his heart pound. "Who is he? Did he say his name?" "He said his name is John Thaddeus Farris. He said he's your brother." The world stopped. The screwdriver fell from Anthony's hand, hitting the cement floor with a metallic sound that echoed through the yard. He had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "Where? Which station exactly?" The man gave the coordinates, explaining it was the Southern Star Service Station, kilometer 423. He said Thaddeus was conscious but needed help, had injuries that seemed to be from a truck accident. "I'll be right there," Anthony said, already running into the house. "Can you ask him to stay? Please don't let him leave." "I'll do what I can, sir. But he's very weak. I don't think he'll be leaving anytime soon." Anthony entered the house like a hurricane. Luna was in the living room watching cartoons and looked up, surprised by the sudden agitation. "Get your things," he said, trying to control his voice so as not to scare her. "We're going on a trip." "Where?" she asked, but was already getting up, grabbing the backpack she always left near the door. "Your father," Anthony said, and saw the girl's eyes widen. "I think we found your father." The journey was an eternity of 3 hours. Anthony drove the old car he had bought a few months ago, a beat-up but reliable sedan, exceeding the speed limit whenever the road allowed. Luna was in the back seat, too quiet for a child, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the landscape rushing past the window. "Will he recognize me?" she asked at one point, her voice so small it almost got lost in the engine noise. "He will, my dear," Anthony replied, and for the first time he used that term without thinking, without calculating. It came out naturally, truly. "Your father never forgot you. Never." The Southern Star Service station was a large structure on the side of the motorway, with fuel pumps, a diner, and a rest area for truckers. Anthony parked haphazardly and ran inside, Luna clinging to his hand. In the diner, sitting at a back table with an improvised compress on his arm, was a man Anthony took a few seconds to recognize. Thaddeus was thinner, much thinner. He had a long grey beard, long hair tied in a ponytail, and manual worker's clothes stained with grease and blood. His face was marked by superficial cuts, and he held his left arm in a way that suggested a fracture. But his eyes, when they met Anthony's, were the same as 5 years ago, sad, tired, but still alive. For an infinite moment, the two brothers just looked at each other. 5 years of silence, of resentment, of regret weighed in the air between them like an invisible wall. Anthony felt his throat tighten, the words he had rehearsed throughout the trip dying before reaching his lips. Thaddeus stood up with difficulty, staggering slightly, and it was then that Luna let go of Anthony's hand. "Daddy!" she cried, and her voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. She ran the few feet separating her from Thaddeus and threw herself against him with full force, not caring about his injuries, not calculating the impact. Thaddeus almost fell from the shock, but managed to balance himself and enveloped his daughter with his good arm, burying his face in her hair. His shoulders trembled, and Anthony realized his brother was crying, muffled sobs he tried to control without success. "My little one," Thaddeus managed to say, his voice broken. "My Luna, how you've grown." "You went away," the girl said, alternating between hugging him and gently hitting his chest. "You promised you'd come back and you went away." "I know, my love, I know. Forgive me. Forgive me for everything." Anthony stood a few feet away, watching that reunion, feeling simultaneously a fundamental part of that moment and a complete intruder. He didn't know whether to approach, whether to give them space, whether to speak or remain silent. It was Thaddeus who made the decision for him. He looked up, still holding Luna against his chest, and met his brother's gaze. There were so many emotions in those eyes that Anthony couldn't identify them all. Pain, certainly. Fear, perhaps. But also something he didn't expect to find. Relief. And perhaps, just perhaps, forgiveness. "Brother," Thaddeus said simply. Anthony took a step forward, then another. And then he was hugging his brother and niece at the same time, forming a closed circle where for a moment nothing else existed. There were not enough words to express what needed to be said, so they didn't try. They stood there, 3 people whom life had tried to separate, but whom destiny insisted on reuniting. The owner of the service station, an old man with a grey mustache named Mr. Walter, offered a back room where they could talk in private. He brought water, coffee, some buttered rolls. Luna ate with appetite, sitting on Thaddeus's lap, while he stroked her hair with automatic movements, as if needing to confirm that she was real. "Tell me," Anthony finally asked, when the silence began to weigh too heavily. "Tell me everything." Thaddeus took a deep breath, grimaced in pain as he adjusted the position of his injured arm. "It's a long story, brother, and not a very pretty one." "I have time," Anthony assured him, "and I need to hear it. All of it." So Thaddeus began. He told how he had discovered the diversion scheme in the company, how he had gathered evidence for months, taking risks that only now Anthony could fully grasp. He told about the threats he began to receive, calls in the middle of the night, strange cars parked in front of his house, messages left in a way that only he would understand. He explained that he had tried to talk to Anthony dozens of times, but Patricia always blocked his access. She intercepted calls, tore up letters, invented engagements when he showed up at the office. And when Leonard finally realized that Thaddeus knew too much, the theft accusations were fabricated with frightening efficiency. "I had no way to prove my innocence without handing over the recordings," Thaddeus explained, his good arm still holding Luna against his chest. "And if I handed over the recordings, they would know I had more hidden evidence. They would come looking for me, and I had Luna to protect." That's when Anthony understood the depth of the choice his brother had made. Thaddeus had preferred to bear the guilt, endure the family's rejection, live as a fugitive, all to protect a child who wasn't even his by blood, and to protect a brother who had accused him of the worst things. "So you disappeared," Anthony said, not as a question but as confirmation. "I left Luna with Mrs. Sebastian, who was the only person I completely trusted. I hid the evidence where it could be found if something went wrong, and I disappeared. I changed my name, my city, my life. I spent the last few years working on construction sites in the countryside, always moving, never staying long enough anywhere to put down roots." "Why didn't you come back?" Anthony asked, and there was no accusation in his voice, only a genuine need to understand. "Luna was waiting for you. Mrs. Sebastian was waiting for you." Thaddeus closed his eyes, and tears streamed down his marked cheeks. "Because I was a coward, brother. Simple as that. I was afraid to come back and find that you had completely turned Luna against me. I was afraid to arrive, and for her not to recognize me, to hate me for abandoning her. So I sent money, as if that could compensate for my absence, as if money could replace hugs." "You're an idiot," Luna said suddenly, and her voice had that brutal honesty of children. "A big idiot. I didn't want money. I wanted you." Thaddeus let out a wet laugh, half cry, half chuckle. "I know, my love. You're right. Your daddy is a big idiot indeed." Anthony waited a moment before speaking again. "I was an idiot too. Worse, perhaps. Because I had the chance to listen to you, and chose not to listen. I chose to believe people who didn't deserve my trust, and disbelieve the only person who had always been on my side. What happened to the company?" Thaddeus asked. "It sank. Leonard is in prison, as are the others involved in the scheme. Patricia took half of what was left, which wasn't much, and disappeared from my life. The company went bankrupt. I lost almost everything." "And you're okay with that?" Anthony looked at Luna, who was now looking between the two men with curiosity, trying to understand that adult conversation. "I'm better than I've ever been," he replied, and it was true. "I have a small but comfortable house. I do renovations to make a living, and I have this incredible girl who taught me what really matters in life." Thaddeus followed his brother's gaze. "You took care of her." "It wasn't quite like that. She took care of me. She taught me to be human again." At that moment, Mr. Walter knocked on the door and informed them that the ambulance they had called had just arrived. Thaddeus needed to go to the hospital to treat his arm and other injuries from the accident. Anthony said he would accompany them, but Thaddeus grabbed his wrist with his good hand. "Brother, before you go, I need to know, do you forgive me?" Anthony felt his eyes sting. "There's nothing to forgive. I'm the one who needs forgiveness, for not believing you, for abandoning you when you needed me most, for letting pride and greed blind my judgment." The two brothers hugged again, this time without Luna between them, just two broken men who finally found their way back to each other. When they separated, there were tears on both their faces, but also smiles. Tired, wounded, but real smiles. At the hospital, they discovered that Thaddeus had his arm fractured in 2 places, several cracked ribs and various cuts that needed stitches. Nothing fatal, but enough to keep him hospitalized for a few days. Anthony and Luna stayed with him the whole time, alternating between the hospital room and a cheap hotel nearby. During those days of hospitalization, the three talked about everything. About the past, about mistakes made, about lost chances, but also about the future, about possibilities of starting over, of building something new on the ruins of what had been destroyed. Thaddeus told more about Luna, about how he found her abandoned in the church square on a cold night, no more than 3 years old, scared and hungry. How he had tried to find her family, searched shelters, made reports, but no one ever appeared to claim her. How he had decided that, if the world had abandoned that child, he would not do the same. Anthony spoke about his transformation in recent months, about how losing everything taught him what truly had value, about the neighbors who were now friends, about the pleasure of working with his hands, about waking up without the weight of lies and appearances. Luna, in turn, told stories from school about the friends she had made, about the teachers she liked. She showed the drawings she always carried in her backpack, explained the details of each one. And little by little the cold hospital room filled with life, with colors, with hope. When Thaddeus was discharged a week later, Anthony already had everything planned. The house he had rented had 3 bedrooms. One was his, another was Luna's. The third was empty, waiting. "You're going to live with us," he said, and it wasn't an invitation, but a statement. "I won't give you the option to refuse." Thaddeus tried to protest, saying he didn't want to be a burden, that he needed to get back on his feet alone first. But Anthony was inflexible. "You're not a burden, you're my brother, and family takes care of family. I learned that from a 9-year-old girl. Don't make me look dumber than I already am." So the 3 of them returned to Ironville together, squeezed into the old car, Luna singing off-key children's songs in the back seat, making the 2 brothers laugh. When they arrived home, it was already night. The neighborhood lights twinkled welcomingly. There was the smell of dinner being prepared somewhere nearby, voices of children playing in the streets. Anthony opened the door and turned on the lights. The house was simple, almost poor by the standards he had known before, but it was clean, organized, full of those small details that transform a building into a home. Luna's drawings on the walls, photos in cheap frames, a patched but comfortable sofa, handmade curtains. "Welcome home," Anthony said. Thaddeus stood in the doorway, observing everything with tear-filled eyes. Then he looked at his brother, at his niece, who was already running to her room looking for a toy to show her father, and something broke inside him. He couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Let them come freely. Years of loneliness and fear finally finding an outlet. Anthony hugged him, and they stood there in the doorway. 2 men who had lost so much, but who had finally found their way home. Because home wasn't the marble and gold mansion. It wasn't the imported cars or the designer clothes. Home was that small space where 3 people who loved each other fit. Home was the sound of a child laughing in the next room. Home was the possibility of starting over. In the months that followed, the 3 established a new routine. Thaddeus, after his arm healed, began working with Anthony on the renovations. At first only light duties, but soon he was side by side with his brother, both their calloused hands building walls, fixing roofs, painting facades. The informal cooperative grew, gaining a reputation for honesty and quality. Luna flourished even more, now with 2 fathers to care for her, to help with homework, to attend school meetings, to watch end-of-year performances. She didn't have the luxurious life that some of her classmates had, but she had something much more valuable. She had presence. She had hugs. She had bedtime. Stories told with different but equally loving voices. The wounds of the past still hurt sometimes. Anthony had nightmares about the wrong choices he had made. Thaddeus still flinched at sudden noises, a reflection of the years living in fear. Luna occasionally woke up crying, calling for Grandma Sebastian, but they faced these pains together, reminding each other that the past did not define them, that each day was a new chance to do better. 3 years had passed since Thaddeus returned home. 3 years that seemed simultaneously an eternity and a blink of an eye, depending on the angle Anthony observed. The small house in the working-class neighborhood had transformed into something he never imagined owning when he lived in the marble mansion, a true home, pulsating with life, noise, love, and that comforting mess, that only a real family can create. On that Saturday morning, Anthony woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread. He went down the creaky stairs in his slippers, rubbing his eyes, and found Thaddeus in the tiny kitchen, preparing breakfast while whistling an old song their father used to sing. The arm that had been fractured in the accident no longer bothered him, although Thaddeus still made that characteristic movement of rotating his shoulder when the weather changed. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Thaddeus teased, flipping a slice of bread in the frying pan. "Luna left an hour ago, said she had rehearsal for the school play." Anthony checked the clock on the wall. 7 in the morning on a Saturday and the girl is already out. She's 12, Thaddeus. 12. When we were that age, we could barely get out of bed before noon on weekends. Thaddeus laughed, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. "Times have changed, brother, and our girl isn't like we were. She has focus, determination. She takes after her uncle, not her irresponsible father." Anthony accepted the mug with a smile. 3 years of living together had restored that fraternal intimacy he thought he had lost forever. The wounds still existed, scars that would probably never completely disappear, but they had learned to live with them, to transform them into reminders of how far they had come. "Speaking of responsibility," Anthony said, sitting at the small table that barely fit in the kitchen, "Robert called yesterday. There's a big project wanting to hire us. An entire housing estate to renovate. 12 houses. Thaddeus stopped mid-motion, his cup suspended in the air. 12 houses? That's too big for us, isn't it? Maybe. Or maybe it's exactly the right size. The cooperative has grown, Thaddeus. We have 15 people working with us now, good professionals, honest people. We can handle it. What if it goes wrong? What if we can't deliver? Our reputation." Anthony interrupted his brother with a gentle gesture. "Then we learn from the mistake and move on. We're no longer those guys who were afraid to fail because they had an image to uphold. We're just 2 brothers trying to do honest work. If we fail, we'll fail together. If we succeed, we'll succeed together." Thaddeus was silent for a moment, processing the words. Finally, a slow smile spread across his sun and work-marked face. "When did you get so wise, brother?" "When a 9-year-old girl taught me that I knew nothing about what really matters in life." The two laughed, and in that simple moment, sharing coffee and buttered bread in a cramped kitchen, Anthony felt a fullness that no million-pound contract had ever given him. The sound of the front door opening interrupted the moment. Luna entered like a hurricane, her backpack hitting her back, her face flushed with excitement. "Dad! Uncle, you won't believe it!" The 2 men turned simultaneously, already used to the girl's dramatic entrances. "What happened, Luna?" Thaddeus asked, already getting up with that fatherly readiness, always alert for possible problems. "Ms. Mariana said our play was selected for the regional festival. We're going to perform in Fairmount, in front of schools from all over the region." Luna jumped as she spoke, her braids swinging, her eyes shining with that pure joy that only children can express unfiltered. Anthony and Thaddeus exchanged a quick glance before standing up and enveloping the girl in a joint hug. "That's incredible, my dear," Thaddeus said, kissing the top of her head. "I knew you could do it." "When's the performance?" Anthony asked, already mentally reorganizing his work schedule. "In 3 weeks, but there's a problem." The joy on Luna's face diminished a little. "We need to pay for transport and accommodation. The school doesn't have the budget for it. Each student needs to contribute £200. £200, it wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't little for the tight budget they maintained. Anthony saw worry settle on Thaddeus's face, that expression he knew well, the same one his brother had as a child when he wanted something but knew they couldn't afford it. "We'll figure it out," Anthony said before Thaddeus could speak. "You're going to that festival, Luna, don't worry about it." "But I heard you talking about the bills this month," Luna said, and there was a maturity in her voice that broke Anthony's heart. "I know it's difficult. I cannot go, it's okay." Thaddeus knelt in front of his daughter, holding her shoulders firmly. "Listen, here, young lady. You worked hard for this, you deserve to go, and your dad and your uncle will make sure you go, understood?" Luna bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. "I love you both. You know that, right?" "We know, my love," Anthony said, feeling his own throat tighten. "And we love you too, more than anything in this world." After Luna went up to her room to study, the two brothers returned to the kitchen. Thaddeus slumped into the chair, running his hands over his face. £200, brother. We barely have enough to pay the electricity bill this month. Anthony sat beside him, thoughtful. Robert's project. If we accept it, he said, he'll pay in advance. It would be enough. But you yourself said, we're not sure if we can handle 12 houses. Then we'll have to. Simple as that. Because that girl upstairs deserves to go to that festival. She deserves to have the opportunities we never gave her in the first years of her life. Thaddeus looked at his brother, and Anthony saw gratitude and something more in those tired eyes. Respect, perhaps admiration. When we were kids, I always wanted to be like you, Thaddeus said softly. Strong, determined, courageous. Then life happened and I thought you had become someone else. Someone I no longer recognized. But now, seeing you like this, fighting for this girl, sacrificing your comfort for us, I realized that brother I admired never left. He was just lost for a while. Anthony felt his eyes sting. I was more than lost, Thaddeus. I was dead inside. You two resurrected me. You and Luna. You reminded me of what truly matters. The two were silent for a moment, a comfortable silence full of mutual understanding. Finally, Anthony hit the table with determination. I'll call Robert. We'll accept the project, and we'll do the best work we've ever done. For the 12 houses, for the clients, but especially for that girl upstairs. Thaddeus extended his hand, and Anthony squeezed it firmly. Together, he said. Always, Anthony replied. The housing estate project began the following Monday. Anthony and Thaddeus arrived at the site at 6 in the morning when the sun was still rising over the hills of Ironville. The estate was old, built in the 70s with 12 semi-detached houses that needed complete renovations. Leaking roofs, obsolete. Plumbing, dangerous electrical wiring, damp walls. It was a huge challenge, but also an opportunity to show what they were capable of. Robert, the engineer responsible for the project, greeted them with a firm handshake. You have 3 months, he said, handing over the plans and specifications. I know it's tight, but the residents are already in rented homes and want to move back. I trust you. Anthony looked at the 12 houses, mentally calculating materials, labor, time. It was possible, but it would require hard work, good team coordination, and no mistakes. We'll do it, he said with a confidence he wasn't sure he truly felt. In the following weeks, the routine became brutal. Waking up at 5 in the morning, working until 7 in the evening, returning home exhausted, quickly having dinner, helping Luna with her homework, falling into bed, and repeating it all the next day. Thaddeus and Anthony took turns with the heaviest tasks, coordinated the teams, solved problems that arose daily. But there was something deeply satisfying about that work. Seeing the houses slowly transforming, walls being erected, roofs being repaired, new plumbing being installed. It was creation. It was construction in the most literal and also metaphorical sense. They were building not only houses, but also a future for Luna, a solid reputation for the cooperative, a life worth living. Luna, in turn, dedicated herself to rehearsals with the same intensity that her fathers dedicated to work. She came home late, after hours of rehearsing at school, and still found energy to talk about the progress, about the scenes that were getting better, about the colleagues who were dedicating themselves. On one of those nights, 2 weeks before the festival, Luna came down to the living room where Anthony and Thaddeus were reviewing budgets and schedules. She was in her pajamas, her hair wet from her bath, but there was a seriousness on her face that immediately caught their attention. "Can I talk to you guys about something?" she asked, sitting on the sofa between the two men. "Of course, my love," Thaddeus said, closing his document folder. "What is it?" Luna was silent for a moment, as if organizing her thoughts. "I was thinking about the performance, about the play we're going to do." "And?" Anthony encouraged. "The play is about family, about a girl who loses her parents and is adopted by an uncle. And in the end, she discovers that family isn't about blood, but about who chooses to stay, who chooses to love." The two men exchanged a quick glance. "Sounds like a good story," Thaddeus said softly. "It's based on my story," Luna continued, her voice growing firmer. "I told Ms. Mariana about how Dad found me, about how Grandma Sebastian took care of me, about how Uncle Anthony showed up and changed everything, and she said it was a beautiful story, that it deserved to be told, so we wrote the play based on that." Anthony felt his throat tighten. "Are you sure you want to share this with everyone, Luna? It's a very personal story." "That's exactly why I want to share it," she replied, and there was a wisdom in her eyes that shouldn't belong to a 12-year-old child. "Because if my story can help other people understand that family is about choice, about love, about not giving up even when everything seems lost, then it's worth telling." Thaddeus pulled his daughter into a tight hug, and Anthony saw tears streaming down his brother's face. "You are incredible, my dear, so strong, so wise. I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You chose me," Luna said simply. "When everyone else had abandoned me, you chose me. That's what you did to deserve me." That night, after Luna went to sleep, Anthony and Thaddeus stood on the small back porch, drinking cold coffee and looking at the stars twinkling in the clear Ironville sky. "She's growing up too fast," Thaddeus said, his voice tinged with melancholy. "It seems like yesterday I found her in that square. So small, so scared." "And look at her now," Anthony replied. "Strong, confident, generous. You did an incredible job." "With her, brother." "We did," Thaddeus corrected. "You're her father too, Anthony. Maybe not on paper, but in everything that matters." Anthony let those words sink deep into his heart. Father. He had never thought of himself in those terms, but Thaddeus was right. In the last 3 years, he had been as present in Luna's life as Thaddeus himself. He had attended school meetings, helped with homework, comforted her in moments of sadness, celebrated small and big victories. He was a father, yes, and that realization brought a profound joy he didn't know was possible to feel. The day of the festival arrived with an impeccable blue sky and heat that promised to be intense. Anthony, Thaddeus, and Luna left Ironville at 5 in the morning in the old car that Anthony kept running more out of stubbornness than proper mechanics. The drive to Fairmount would take about 2 hours, and Luna spent the entire journey reviewing her lines, nervous and excited at the same time. "You're going to stay and watch, right?" she asked for the 10th time. "We wouldn't miss it for anything in the world," Anthony assured her, driving carefully along the winding road. "Even if the performance is at 3 in the afternoon and you have to go back to work early tomorrow?" "Even so," Thaddeus confirmed. "Today is your day, Luna. Work can wait." The theatre where the festival would take place was an imposing building in the center of Fairmount, with white columns and a facade that spoke of history and culture. Luna gasped when she saw the size of the place, and Anthony saw a flicker of fear cross her eyes. "It's very big," she murmured. Thaddeus knelt in front of her, right there on the busy sidewalk. "Remember what I always tell you, you're small, but you have a huge heart, and when you're on stage, that heart shines so brightly it fills any space, no matter the size." Luna took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll do it." "You will," Anthony said, ruffling her hair affectionately. "And we'll be in the audience cheering for you." They entered the theatre and were greeted by Ms. Mariana, a young woman with kind eyes who hugged Luna enthusiastically. "She's ready," the teacher told Anthony and Thaddeus. "You have no idea how hard she worked for this." "Oh, we do have an idea," Thaddeus replied proudly. "Our girl doesn't do anything by halves." Luna was taken backstage with the other students, and Anthony and Thaddeus found seats in the audience. The theatre was full, hundreds of people waiting for the performances. There were schools from all over the region, each with their plays, their nervous actors, their anxious teachers. The performances began at noon. Plays about the environment, about the history of the country, about folklore legends, all well made, all with that special charm that only school performances have. But Anthony could barely pay attention, his mind focused only on Luna's performance, which would be one of the last. Finally, at 3:30 in the afternoon, Ms. Mariana went on stage to introduce the play. "This is a story about family," she said, her voice echoing through the theatre, "about loss and reunion, about how love can heal the deepest wounds. It's a true story, lived by one of our students and transformed into art by the whole class." We hope it touches your hearts as it touched ours. The lights went out. The stage was dark for a moment. Then, a spotlight illuminated Luna, sitting alone in the center of the stage, dressed in simple clothes, hugging an old doll, and she began to speak. Her voice was clear, firm, full of emotion, but without losing technique. She told the story of an abandoned girl, found by a kind-hearted man who had little to offer, but love. She told about a grandmother who cared lovingly despite poverty. She told about a distant uncle who reappeared and learned the true meaning of family. Anthony recognized every scene. It was their lives there, exposed to hundreds of strangers, but somehow universal, touching on themes everyone could understand: loss, redemption, unconditional love, second chances. When the play reached its end, with the girl embraced by the two men who had become her fathers, declaring that family was about who chose to stay, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Anthony felt tears streaming freely down his face, and when he looked to the side, he saw that Thaddeus was in the same situation. The audience erupted in applause. People stood up, a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. Luna and her classmates bowed, huge smiles on their faces, and when Luna looked into the audience and found Anthony's and Thaddeus's eyes, she waved. And that simple gesture contained all the love, all the gratitude, all the joy that a child could express. After the performance backstage, Luna was surrounded by teachers, parents of other students, even some festival judges. Everyone wanted to congratulate her, to say how the play had touched their hearts. Ms. Mariana approached Anthony and Thaddeus with tears in her eyes. "You have raised a special girl," she said. "Not just talented, but with an immense heart." She told the whole class about how you sacrifice everything for her, how hard you work to give her opportunities. "You are wonderful. Fathers." Thaddeus couldn't answer, just nodded, too emotional for words. Anthony squeezed the teacher's hand. "Thank you for believing in her, for giving her this opportunity." When they finally managed to leave the theater, it was already night. Luna was exhausted but radiant, talking non-stop about the performance, about the applause, about how everything had gone well. They stopped at a simple diner on the way back and ate hamburgers and fries, an extravagance that the budget barely allowed, but that the moment demanded. "This was the best day of my life," Luna declared, her mouth full of fries. "Ours, too, my love," Thaddeus said, and Anthony nodded in agreement. On the way back to Ironville, Luna slept in the back seat, exhausted by the day's emotion. Anthony drove in silence, and Thaddeus looked out the window at the darkness of the road. "Do you think we're doing it right?" Thaddeus asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" "With Luna, with everything. We give her such a simple life, so different from what you could have given her if you still had the company, if you still had money." Anthony thought carefully before answering. "When I had money, I had an empty mansion, a fake marriage, friends who only cared about what I could do for them. Now I have a small house but full of love. I have a brother who is my best friend. I have a niece who taught me what really matters. Do you think I would trade that for all the money in the world?" Thaddeus was silent for a moment. "No, I don't think so." "Then we're doing it right. Maybe Luna doesn't have designer clothes or expensive toys, but she has presence. She has love. She has two fathers who would give their lives for her. And that, brother, that's worth more than any fortune." The housing estate project was completed a week ahead of schedule. The 12 houses were transformed, unrecognizable compared to the state in which they found them. Robert conducted the final inspection with an ever-growing smile on his face. "You exceeded all expectations," he said, shaking Anthony's and Thaddeus's hands. "The work is impeccable. The residents will be very happy." And then came the part Anthony appreciated most. Robert handed over the final payment, and it was more than they had agreed upon. "There's a bonus in there," he explained, "for the quality, for being ahead of schedule, and because I want to make sure you accept the next project I bring." "Next project," Thaddeus repeated, his eyes wide. "I have a client who wants to build a small social housing complex, 20 affordable homes. A big project, but after seeing your work here, I know you can handle it. Interested?" Anthony looked at Thaddeus and saw in his brother's face the same mix of fear and excitement he felt. We'll need to talk, analyze, see if we have the capacity, Anthony said, keeping his voice professional even, with his heart pounding. Of course, but think carefully. You have something rare these days, integrity, and that's worth its weight in gold in the market. That night, at home, the three celebrated with a special dinner. Thaddeus made his famous lasagna, the one that took hours to prepare but was delicious. Luna set the table with a tablecloth they normally only used on very special occasions. Anthony opened a bottle of cheap wine he had saved for important moments. They toasted to the success of the project, to the future of the cooperative, to Luna's performance at the festival. They toasted to each other, to the family they had built on the ruins of broken lives. After dinner, while Luna washed the dishes, singing off-key, Thaddeus called Anthony to the veranda. He had something he wanted to show him. He pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket and handed it to his brother. Anthony opened it and found a letter. The handwriting was familiar, but it took a few seconds to recognize. It was from Patricia. He read quickly. She wrote apologizing, saying she had reflected a lot in recent years, that she recognized her mistakes. She said she was in therapy, working on herself, trying to become a better person. And she asked if Anthony would agree to meet her to talk, without commitments, just to close that chapter in a healthier way. "What do you think?" Anthony asked, returning the letter. "I think it's your decision, brother, but if you want my opinion, I think everyone deserves a chance to redeem themselves. You gave me that chance. Maybe it's time to give her one too." Anthony looked at the starry sky, thinking. Part of him wanted to simply ignore the letter, move on without looking back. But another part, the part that had learned about forgiveness and second chances in the last 3 years, knew Thaddeus was right. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "I don't promise anything, but I'll think." That's all she can ask for. The two were silent for a moment, a comfortable silence full of mutual understanding. Finally, Anthony spoke. "You know I love you, right, brother? I don't say it often, but I need you to know." Thaddeus smiled, that slow, genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "I know, and I love you too. Always have, even when we were fighting, even when it seemed impossible to go back." "We made it," Anthony said, more to himself than to his brother. "Against all odds, we made it." "We did," Thaddeus agreed, "and we'll keep making it, because that's what family does. It doesn't give up, no matter how hard it gets." Luna appeared at the veranda door, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Are you two having a brother moment?" she asked with a mischievous smile. "Can I join, or is it just for adults?" "Come here, young lady," Thaddeus said, opening his arms. Luna squeezed between the two men, and the three of them stood there embracing, looking at the stars. Anthony thought about how strange life was, how paths twisted in unpredictable ways. 3 years ago, he was at rock bottom, having lost everything he thought was important. Now, he had everything that truly mattered. "Dad," Luna said suddenly, her voice dreamy. "Yes, my love," Thaddeus replied. "No, not you. Uncle Anthony." Anthony felt his heart leap. It was the first time Luna had called him that. "Yes, Luna. Can I call you Dad too? I mean, you're kind of my dad. You take care of me, you love me, you're always here. So can I?" Anthony had to swallow several times before he could speak. "Of course you can, my dear. It would be an honor." "Cool. So now I have 2 dads. I'm like the luckiest kid in the world." "Yeah," Thaddeus said, his voice choked. "I think we're the lucky ones, for having you." They stayed there late, talking about plans for the future, about the new project Robert had offered, about Luna's upcoming school performances. They talked about small things and big things, about dreams and realities, about fears and hopes. When they finally went inside to sleep, Anthony passed Luna's room and saw her already in bed, hugging the old doll she never abandoned. He entered silently and adjusted the blanket over her. "Good night, Dad," she murmured, half asleep. "Good night, my dear," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Dream beautiful things." In the hallway, he met Thaddeus coming out of the bathroom. The two looked at each other and no words were needed. Everything that needed to be said was there, in that gaze, in that moment of absolute understanding between brothers who had been through hell and returned together. Anthony entered his room. lay down on the simple bed with clean, fragrant sheets, and for the first time in many years, fell asleep instantly, without nightmares, without regrets, without the crushing weight of a life wrongly lived. Because finally, after so long lost, he had found his way home. And home wasn't a place. Home was the people he loved, who loved him back, who chose to stay even when everything seemed impossible. Home was Thaddeus, his brother, his best friend, his partner in all battles. Home was Luna, his heart's daughter, his life's teacher, his reason to be. Better every day. Home was that simple building in the working-class neighborhood, with its peeling walls and small backyard, but full of love, laughter, and true life. And for the first time in his existence, Anthony Farris was truly home. Epilogue. 5 years later, Anthony was in the small office they had rented for the cooperative, now officially registered as Farris Brothers Construction. The walls were decorated with photos of completed projects, quality certificates, and a large photo of Luna at her middle school graduation. The phone rang. It was Robert, with another project. There was always another project. The reputation they had built was solid, based on honest work, met deadlines, impeccable quality. Thaddeus entered the office with 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Anthony, and sat in the chair beside him. They had a meeting in half an hour with a new client, but before that they had a few minutes just to be brothers. "Did you see that Luna was accepted into that technical school?" Thaddeus said, pride evident in his voice. "The one she wanted, for architecture." "I did. Our girl is going to be an architect. Who would have thought? She said she wants to work with us when she graduates. Design affordable housing, do social projects." "Of course she does," Anthony laughed. "She learned from the best." The two laughed, that easy laugh of people who know each other deeply, who have been through so much together that nothing else could separate them. The office door opened and Luna entered, now 17, tall and beautiful, but still with those dark, intense eyes that had changed Anthony's life so many years ago. "Are you ready?" she asked. "The client will be here in 10 minutes. "We are," Anthony said, standing up. The three left the office together, a family united not by blood but by choice, by love, by all the battles they had faced and won side by side. And as they walked down the sunny street of Ironville, Anthony looked at his brother and his daughter and knew with absolute certainty that he had found something no fortune could buy, no mansion could house, no title could confer. He had found redemption. He had found love. He had found family. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered.